Thanks, Tony. Opinionated, that's great. Beyond developing a site inside activity tracking, I've also been a venture capitalist for the last 8 years, now focused on the wearable space. But why don't you all come up? We have Manisha Prakash from Lumo Body, Marco Della Torre from Basis Science, and Robert Connor from Medibotics. So the topic today is, do all of these graphs, devices, and details make a difference in our lives? And the things we're going to cover today are, one, digging behind the users and usage to see what works and what doesn't in changing behavior. Second topic we're going to cover is how different form factors influence behavior change. And the third area we're going to focus on is the impact of data and the different issues surrounding data and how that impacts behavior change and the opportunities pursued by these companies. And I'll ask that we hold our questions till the end. We'll have 10, 15 minutes at the end. So let's get rolling. I'll have everyone introduce themselves in the context of a question. So how many in the audience have purchased a fitness tracker? How many of you actually use a fitness tracker? Roughly the same. And how many of you have thrown away or mothballed a fitness tracker? Interesting. Okay, so I'm a product of the 80s. And in the 80s, the infomercial market exploded. Whether it was the Vimaster, the Perfect Push-Ups, or the Bowflex, billions of dollars are spent annually on products addressing fitness. Make me feel better, make me faster, lose weight, and so. And I'm a sucker for those things. I mean, and I'm a sucker now. I've got my Fitbit, I've got my Shine, I've got my Polar strap, I've got my Fuel Band. I don't have a Basis and I don't have a Lumo back. I probably would be using them. But this is all in my closet, and this is exactly how I found them, like this. So in the context of that phenomenon of wasted spend, I want everyone to introduce themselves one at a time and tell us why, besides the fact that I'm just incredibly lazy, but why is this different? Why are we in a time where this is different?
Sure. Hi, I'm Manisha Prakash. I'm co-founder and CEO of Lumo Body Tech, where our vision is to give the body a voice. Our first product is the Lumo Back Posture and Activity Sensor. The way it works is you wear a band around your waist. It tracks your posture. When you slouch, it vibrates very discreetly to remind you to straighten up, and it also connects wirelessly to an app where a lot of tracking happens there as well. And how I think the fitness trackers can overcome becoming, mothballed is it's about active versus passive feedback. Even, when you talk about the tools from the 80s and even some of the trackers that exist today, data by itself isn't enough. It's what you do with that data. It's how do you turn that data into actionable feedback, meaningful feedback that really matters to the person and meets them with where they're at based on their goals. So in the case of Lumo Back, how we really think we will stay very relevant with our users is it gives you actionable feedback. If you're slouching, you get a vibration. You can also see visual feedback through a little avatar that mimics your posture. So when you're in bad posture, the avatar shows it, and it will guide you into good posture so that when you're in good posture, it turns green. So you can visually see. And there's also notifications to let you know when you've been sitting for too long or when there's other tips that you can try in terms of improving your health and wellness. So it's really about being active versus passive, and it's about actionable feedback that's relevant to the end user.
Marco?
Well said. So hi, my name is Marco, co-founder and VP of Product Science at Basis. We make the most advanced wrist wearable for health and fitness. It's called the Basis Band. I think your thoughts are absolutely right. I think part of it speaks to David's skepticism, which is that all the things in his bag do kind of the same thing. Our device has 5 biosensors that measures heartbeats and skin temperature and perspiration and actual physiological signals. So we're trying to get past this idea of just counting steps and into what's happening inside the body. And beyond that, exactly as Manisha said, turning that into actionable guidance for a user, things that they can actually change their lives on. So we developed a system called the Healthy Habits. It's basically trained on behavioral psychology to actually sort of work with you. It adjusts your goals dynamically. It bases all your metrics on automatic detection, so it knows when you're walking or running or cycling. You don't actually have to tell it. And based on that, it actually understands your lifestyle, sets goals that adjust ahead of where you are, and then adjust those over time. I think for us, certainly the usability of the data, turning the charts and graphs into something actionable is important. For us, automation is also really important. The fact that we can automatically detect when you're asleep and when you wake up, when you're going on those runs, when you're on your bike, when you're sedentary. The fact that it does all those things for you are really important. We find that anytime you have to do something, press a button, set a mode, turn around twice, whatever it is, a lot of users get dropped off your system at that point. The engagement just drops off a cliff. So the degree to which you can automate these experiences is really important.
My name is Bob Connor. I'm the CEO of Medibotics. You're talking about the device that sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake. It sounds very seasonal. Why things are different now, I would say, because there are things which can be done for something on your wrist, incorporated into clothing, otherwise worn or attached to the body, which can't be done in a pocket or in a handheld device. Miniaturization, I think, has been huge. Miniaturization of accelerometers and other sensors. And then also miniaturization and better power supply and wireless technology, which is why I think that the recipe is more ripe for these things to work now as compared to perhaps 5 or 10 years ago.
So a lot of those are wonderful aspirations. Let me give some numbers. You can accept them or not, but I think directionally they're accurate. There's some whisper numbers in the industry. Certainly around health app abandonment rates of 70-75% within the first month. People are gone. On the device side, there have been really high return rates, and there are a lot of reasons for returns, not just they're not working. Yet clearly, for certain companies, depending on how they define their goals, there have been great successes. So if you ask someone quietly from Nike, for instance, what their goals are, and they'd say, if we can get people to even think about movement, we win, which makes sense. They're a $25 billion sporting goods equipment apparel company, and people who think about movement think about buying products. But there's no question changing people's behavior is really difficult. So finish the sentence for me within the context of your companies. We win when users do what? And then elaborate for me. Marco?
Basis wins when people change their lifestyle for the healthier. And we don't see anything as bad as those retention rates, thank goodness. And part of it is because there's a lot more to do in our system than simply take a few steps and count those, or things that you can do in one day and experience everything. The system has a cadence by which you pick one thing to work on and then increase that over time, so you're working on your whole lifestyle. So it takes time to actually get through the system, because health is really a 24/7 experience. It's not something that you can improve in a day. Part of the challenge with this industry is really that health is something that takes a good long while to change. And in an era of instant gratification, it's tough to balance those two things. You need to give people some sense of delight immediately, but you need them to understand that health isn't going to change overnight. So you need to keep them on a system long enough and have them making those little changes over time so that they actually get to that end point. And part of that is about celebrating the steps along the way. So that's kind of what we focused on. Picking milestones regularly and at a regular cadence, as well as sort of often in your day and in your week, that you can celebrate. And when you look back, you realize that all those little milestones actually added up to something really important. Of course, everyone's trying to reach this end goal of people being healthier. I think the different approaches speak to the fact that this is still a hugely growing industry, and a lot of different approaches solving parts of that problem, and a lot of people getting left behind in terms of functionality that's really outdated. So I think there's a huge opportunity here. These guys are certainly part of the next advanced wave of how we're doing this, but it needs to be more integrated with lifestyle than what we've seen before. It can't just be an independent sort of...
So can you dig a little bit deeper into that and talk to me about, use the analogy of stars and stepping stones, right? The star is get people active, sure. Get them healthy. Walk me through some of those encouraging metrics that give you encouragement to move to the next big hurdles. What are people doing, and how are you measuring it that makes you think they're getting more active?
Absolutely. So when you join the Basis system, you pick one habit, And it can be anything about activity and sleep. It could be a run, cycling, anything that you do in your life that relates to your health. And you set a goal that's in a healthy range, and we see how you're going. And as we see how you're going, we adjust that goal so that it matches how you're really doing, and it sets that new challenge just above where you are. So if you indulge me for 1 second, the guys at Stanford in the Captology lab do a really great job of describing this, and they say there's basically 3 ways to change people's lifestyle in a meaningful, long-term way. One is to have an epiphany. So like if somebody who you love contracts diabetes, that'll make you want to exercise more and eat better, and it's tough to build into a product, and none of us would want to buy it, but it'll work. The second one is to change context. So if I took this room and transplanted it to Fiji, we'd all be drinking Mai Tais and wearing board shorts, and our life would be very different. And the third way is to have tiny wins and scale them up over time. So start with something really achievable. They say infinitely achievable, which I really like, and then celebrate that, and then increase that over time. And so that's really one of the schools of thought that led us to this idea of starting with the daily stars in multiple areas, educating people through an achievable sort of system that health is 24 hours, and then scaling that up over time.
Wins for us are along the lines of being able to look at the data and seeing that people's posture are improving over time, that they are sitting less and they're moving more. On the anecdotal side, it's hearing stories from our customers saying that they're taking fewer painkillers for their back, or they're really avoiding surgery, and we're helping them as part of their way to try to rehab their backs naturally. To hearing that they feel that they can breathe better and they're more energetic because they have better posture. Or to hearing that, their husband told them that they look hot because they, have much better posture now. So it's all of that. It's the qualitative and the quantitative that we look for in our users' stories to know that we're winning.
Robert, what do you you've done some great landscaping of the industry. What do you see that's working? Where are the wins happening?
Well, we do not currently have a commercial product, so we would win if people were aware that we exist. But 2 areas we are focusing on is basically motion recognition clothing, which would be sort of full body ambulatory measurement of motion. And then also I think there's an area which probably isn't very much on the radar screen, although fully touched upon it this morning, of the intake part of the energy balance equation. In particular, with low-cost accelerometers and some of the other advances, there's been a lot of advancement on the measuring the caloric output side, but for overall energy balance, weight management, health, et cetera, less so on the caloric intake side. And I think that people will be focusing on that a lot in a year or 2, and that's one of the things we've been focusing on in terms of a wearable approach, either with an accelerometer to determine patterns associated with eating, or a short-range camera, or other approaches. There have been some recent startups that have talked about using spectroscopy on the wrist. I think the jury's still out on whether that technology would work. But if what people eat is a huge issue, particularly in the US, but also in many areas of the country, and there's some argument that if people could exercise, they want to eat better, and if you could have a device that helps them to eat better, that would be a success.
So I want to unpack both your companies' approach to user activation just a little bit. Maybe you can share, but I'm certainly a firm believer that moving a pixel, even a tiny bit, can make a massive impact, sometimes unanticipated. And there's been a lot of studies, certainly the famous one around Google increasing search time by a tiny fraction, and what it actually means to the search volume overall at scale. I think Asa Raskin does a good job summarizing it in a couple of his talks. But what are some things that you guys have done to tune behaviors that have worked? Really, very tactical things that have worked.
So going back to what we do, by providing that vibratory feedback when you slouch, it's a very, real-time actionable feedback. And what happens is, that's an example of small things making a big difference. When you maintain good posture for a period of time, you develop muscle memory. And to the point that just becomes how you naturally hold yourself. And so it's an example of those small things that you can do to just really have a dramatic impact.
So was the vibration has the vibration ever changed? With more vibration, less vibration, no vibration, different signals to change people's behaviors and get them to do more of what you want them to do. Have you had to dial that up or down?
We enable the users to customize the vibrations because something we have learned is different users want different intensities and different lag times between the bad behavior and, being told, or, between the slouch and the vibration. So we allow those settings to be at the user's discretion. We are also playing around with future product development of how we could use different haptic sensory haptic feedback to provide different kinds of different signals for what you're doing.
We are in California. You could have good vibrations, bad vibrations, depending on your posture, and the appropriate music could come along.
So Marco, what tiny tweaks have made big impacts in user, whether it's adoption, activation, retention?
Yeah, so I'll give you two examples. So when we first launched our product, it could automatically detect whether you were asleep or awake or whether you were in a period of activity. Which people loved. They love this idea that the device knows exactly what you're up to, and it gives you personal access to that. And so we went after expanding that, and now we have these automatic detections for specific activities. And it was kind of surprising to us that hadn't been done before, and that even wearable computers that you wear sort of on a triathlon for your bike don't know when you're starting your ride. And so that automation's been really big for us. Another example is, in the current system, as I said, you pick one habit, and as you succeed, you can add another one, and so forth. We tested a system where you can add as many as you like. And what we found initially is that people get really excited about that. They think, I'm going to be the healthiest person in the world. I'm going to sleep better. I'm going to be more active. It's going to be great. And then they end up being the most confused person in the world because they get up the next day and they say, all right, I've got to get 7 hours sleep, get up at the same time, go to bed at the same time, burn 2,500 calories, go for a run and a walk in the morning, go for a walk in the evening, burn, too much. And that leads to people just falling off the system and not succeeding. So getting those loops right in the system, getting the cadence right so that people are really feeling like the system is matching them, giving them challenge when they want it, but not giving them too much to deal with at one time, because none of us are going to the gym 3 hours every day and maintaining the jobs that we do. So being realistic about what people can really achieve from where they are, giving them every tool to achieve that, that went a long way.
And if you look back before you started the company, you made a bunch of assumptions about user behavior. What were the assumptions that have proven clearly false, or what mistakes have you guys made that you're willing to share with the audience?
Boy, we could talk a lot about our mistakes. Everything from a huge assumption is that people don't really care about data. I mean, you have your hardcore quantified selfers, but for the mass, public, data's data. We're swimming in data. So I call it the so what factor. And you really have to turn that data into insights that the person wouldn't have otherwise had and turn those insights into actionable feedback. So what do I do with this information? How should I use it to change my life? And so as our product has developed, that's assumptions we made and failures we made that we've learned from. Also just along the lines of form factor. When we first set out to do Lumo back, we made the assumption that having a sensor in a patch form factor that you would put on your lower back would be the best one. And we were so sure of it because that's even what people told us they wanted. Well, it wasn't until we actually started doing usability testing and we had people put these sensors on their lower backs using a adhesive form factor, we realized what a bad idea it was. I mean, everything from it kind of develops this sticky kind of, gunk factor, it collects lint, to we found that a lot of people have hairy lower backs. And, this appeal, there wasn't very appealing, taking this thing off of their lower back. So thank God we didn't go too deep into that direction in terms of our design. So then we pivoted and went to clips. And one of our design constraints is because we're taking, among many other things, we're monitoring pelvic tilt. It has to be fairly close to your body. So we thought, well, everyone or almost everyone wears underwear, and the waistband of your underwear is, very close to your body. So this little clip was going to go on the underwear. And we were thinking, well, if we can get people over the weird factor of that, maybe we can make it work. And so we started prototyping that, and then we would have scenarios where it would fall into the toilet, and so we're like, maybe that's not the best association we want with a product. And then that's when we went to the belt form factor. We know people are already familiar with belts. We also discovered that part of your body is not very sensitive, and so the people's tolerance for having things around their waist is quite high. And we did that. We learned this through testing, where a lot of our users would tell us, I forgot that I had it on. And how we tested was we used heart rate monitors, and we had people wear them around their waist. And one of our testers said, I was looking for my heart rate monitor, and I forgot that I actually had it on my waist. And so that's when we sort of learned, okay, that's the right first form factor for us to launch with. But I think it's those things, until you're actually testing and getting it in front of real people and getting real feedback, you don't know, and you have to be open.
The Kickstarter campaign is not enough to judge what will be adopted or not?
No, and all of these things we did were before our Kickstarter campaign. And we learned things from our Kickstarter campaign that we wouldn't have, in terms of our product market fit as well. So,
I'll give you a couple of big mistakes that we made, or maybe that I made, I don't know, but none of them are as exciting as stripping people down to their underwear, unfortunately. The first one was, I'd imagined there being one vector of sort of analytical level of each user. Either you're a really analytical user and you want to see all the data, or you're a pretty generalist kind of user. And if you're more analytical, you're probably more like health and fitness oriented. And if you're less analytical, you're probably like more sedentary and more like in the middle of the bell curve of fitness. Completely wrong. That's probably me. It's unfair to say the company made that mistake. But there's really two axes, at least, that are important there. One is that you can be at all different levels of health and fitness, and at any level of analytical to general. You can be someone who runs a marathon each week and is pretty general. You don't dive in deep into your data. You're not looking at your perspiration in microsiemens per centimeter, your heart rate variability, any of those things. Or you can be someone who's pretty sedentary, but just geeks out on data, loves that. That's how they connect with their body through these services. So understanding both of those is really important. That's why our website's built into a few different sections. One of them is insights. One of them is detail that gets you inside each of the sensor information. So that's really important. The second thing we got right in the end was that we had important engineering decisions early around customizability. It would have been much easier to design a device that doesn't have removable parts. A lot of devices, you buy them and they're the color you bought them for the rest of their life. And we wanted to have something that you could change. You could have, a cool black and chrome band for when you're sitting on stage at a conference. Then you can have a multicolor one when you're out on a Friday night. Pick something that really matches whatever you're wearing or your style, your personality. And that's worked out really well for us. It's been really great in terms of having people really want to wear a device 24/7 as opposed to kind of having to for the benefit. So that's something we might have gotten wrong and eventually certainly got right.
So there's specific metrics that you're both happy about to show that behaviors are changing that you've talked about. Tell me about just the more general or anecdotal behavior change. Are people happy? Are they happier? How do you measure fulfillment, which a lot of products claim?
So I think the easiest way is to look at social and direct feedback. So people coming into our forums and posting messages, people getting in contact with us, a lot of awesome feedback. I think also just looking at the types of users that are actually interacting with our product. We'd imagined that because we were going after really sort of a lifestyle play and having people trying to change their lifestyle in general as opposed to sort of performance athletes or sort of needs-based users, we'd imagined that we'd have a pretty mainstream kind of audience. A lot of those sort of niche or performance-type users wouldn't be as attracted to the system. Completely wrong. It turns out that athletes who run a lot or cycle a lot, are really passionate about their sport, realize that there's no good tool for the other 23 hours in their day. There's nothing that gives them their resting heart rate every day. There's nothing that is actually helping them tune their whole life but still lets them have that performance mentality for whatever event they're passionate about. So that particular learning about how there's value for those people who really probably are outside what we'd imagine the core user base to be, but then certainly gravitating to them, welcoming them, and then starting to listen to them a lot about future features. That's huge for us.
I could comment. I myself don't have a commercial product, but I come from Minnesota and I've taught a course on the medical device industry for 12, 13 years, and I thought I'd offer sort of a parable, actually one of Aesop's fables about the tortoise and the hare, to sort of compare very different cultures in sort of traditional medical device, large companies, mainly implantable, versus the consumer electronics culture, for lack of a better generalization. California moving very fast, morphing from fitness to health. And so one of the questions was how are these things improving health? And if it was sort of how those different cultures would address that question. The analogy would be, if you're familiar with it, there's the Aesop's fable is there's the tortoise or the turtle that moves very slow, and then there's the hare or the rabbit that moves very fast. And in the fable, the rabbit gets cocky, takes a nap, and the slow but steady tortoise wins. I do not know whether the tortoise or hare will win in this, the tortoise perhaps being an analogy to the traditional medical device companies. They have they move slow, but clinical trials, lots of quality control, FDA approval process, maybe 2-3 years, randomized control trials, $10, $50, $100 million in testing, journal articles, this whole culture of bringing a traditional medical device to market, as compared to perhaps consumer electronics moving very quickly. First you set up the Kickstarter, and then you get the pre-orders and FDA, schmefda kind of deal. So if the consumer electronics is sort of the rabbit and the traditional medical device is sort of the tortoise, you could argue that the consumer electronics folks, as they move from fitness to health, if they begin making claims, by the way, you can say that our device will improve your mood and connect you with relatives around the world, and the FDA won't care about that. You can say it'll measure activity and help you to feel better. The FDA won't care about that. But if you say that it'll help you address obesity or help you to avoid heart attacks, if you make a sort of a marketing claim of diagnosing or treating a disease, then the FDA may take interest in that. For those of you who have seen The Lord of the Rings, there's sort of the big eye up there, I see you. That might happen to you if you're a startup and you make these kinds of disease treatment or claims. So one scenario is that the consumer electronics will sort of be measuring things imprecisely, not with the precision or quality of the lumbering traditional medical device, and that they'll begin to reach into the health field and sort of reach roadblock or FDA and not know how to deal with it. The other possibility is that the rapidly moving consumer electronics could eclipse sort of the traditional medical device, et cetera, or they could wind up collaborating, which I guess would be the rabbit riding on the tortoise. What I will say is I reviewed sort of the clinical literature and medical literature to evaluate health, and very few peer-reviewed publications on the new wave technology, with one or two exceptions, and one of which is Body Media, in addition to their strong patent portfolio, and I don't have a financial interest in them. If anything, they're a competitor. But you will see clinical trials about their ability to, for example, measure activity and measure weight loss. They do struggle, though, because there is an effect whereby the control group often loses weight in addition to the experimental group. But I could go on further if people are interested in that. And then a little bit of analysis. Philippe mentioned Fitbit and measurement of sleep, a little bit of that. But in general, not much evidence in the clinical literature, medical literature, very few clinical trials in this whole space to really evaluate with the rigor that, for example, the FDA would be looking for.
Thank you. I want to ask a slightly different go in a slightly different area. You've got technology, you've got a specific form factor, and you've got a specific form factor. But how do you think about other behaviors that might be addressed or changed with the technology that you've built? Where does this extend?
Mm-hmm. For us, the form factor is just an enabler for the true underlying technology to have its power. So for us, the technology that we take pride in is our very advanced biomechanical model that is able to track your body's movements and biomechanics to a very high resolution. And so today that technology is being materialized or manifests itself through the band and we're focusing on posture for sitting and standing, and we can also detect walking and sleeping and things like that. But where we plan to go is applying this technology, applying our advanced biomechanical model for feedback along the lines of other body movements. So whether it's giving you feedback on your running form, so that you can become a more efficient runner and less prone to injury, or feedback on your golf stroke, or your cycling, or your yoga poses. All of these areas where having very fine-grained resolution into what you're doing with your body, how you're using your body, and how the use of your body in a different way could drive different results for yourself is where we see the landscape for us rolling out.
I think on the form factor side, it's always curious to me, when we did our first prototypes a few years ago, we look a lot like a watch, which is great because you don't have to explain to anyone how to use it, and they put it on and it's ready to go and it does everything automatically. And people kind of said to us, like, you're building a watch? Like, I haven't worn a watch ever, and my dad wears a watch, and he's not going to give up his Rolex for this, and what are you guys doing? Yeah. And now everyone seems to be building a watch, or at least plans to at some point in the near future. So I think we're learning a lot about what form factors make sense for wearable technology.
Do you move beyond the watch?
I don't know. I think certainly there's an opportunity to do that. I think the watch has been really great for us because having a screen is really sweet. Having that instant feedback, being able to say, like, okay, I know my heart rate and my calories, and I can go through and see all the metrics right there and have a visual link. As Manisha was saying, that visual link is really important. Having that on the wrist anytime has been really great for us. We're still so early in this wearable technology trend, at least this wave of that wearable technology trend, that I think it would be unfair to limit us to just the wristwatch form factor.
So let's switch topics to something, a very Bay Area topic that I'm sure the two of you love. Let's focus on data, because data can have a massive impact on getting to these change behaviors. But it's an area fraught with legal issues, privacy issues, accuracy issues, comprehensiveness issues, ownership issues, interoperability, all these. It's really a minefield. It's very clear that the next generation of sensing technology and power management, form factors, is going to enable us to extract way more data from our bodies, but also from outside the body. But it's very clear that not all data is good data. Let's talk about accuracy, because Philippe was up here earlier, and I know he's got a particular point of view about accuracy and mattering. But how do you balance the issue of kind of directionally being accurate versus being accurate?
For us, we try to be very accurate. In fact, some researchers at Stanford have put our Lumo back head-to-head against the tracker that they use called ActivePal to be able to monitor sitting versus standing as well as steps. And they have found Lumo back to be as accurate, if not more, than what is already sort of industry standard in academia. We also have relationships with Mayo Clinic and other sort of scientific institutions, and I know it's because of the deep level of accuracy that we have. Now, it's not going to be 100%. It would be hard to get there, but I think it is important, and I think it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. So that's what I'll say about data. I have other comments, but I think you're going to go somewhere else.
So a couple of things for us. Accuracy is really the reason we have biosensors in our device, specifically more biosensors than just the accelerometer. We wanted to be capturing more of what's real about your lifestyle than just how many steps you took. And there's some flow-on benefits to those sensors directly in terms of putting together how much heart rate is reflecting your level of activity, your level of caloric exertion. That's really important. And then also looking at how you use those sensors in new ways. So we detect, for example, when you're cycling automatically. Accelerometers haven't really done a good job of that in the past because they don't know that you're cycling, so they don't give you the right credit for that because your body's not moving as wildly as it is when you're running. But we can actually detect that you're cycling and give you the appropriate credit for that. And that really boosts our accuracy a lot. So it's a combination of having more sensors in the device and also having more intelligence to actually identify activities and use that intelligence to improve the accuracy of the physiological metrics.
So beyond having accurate data, what about your data policy, and how has that influenced user adoption? And what I'm particularly interested in is you can scare the tar out of users by putting it front and center. Who owns it? What's going to be done with it? And you got always, I think you always do a walk the fine line of too much data, not enough data, or even presenting incomplete data because it has a gap that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. So this might have been one that I brought up on things that I got wrong, because we have a closed platform right now in the sense that the data goes just to the basis servers and to the basis experience. And we were very cautious about privacy. Users control their data. It's very much in the user's hands right now. And
how do they know that?
It's explicitly stated when you sign up to the product.
Do they read it?
Yeah, they do. Actually, this is part of my answer.
Do you believe that users actually want to read it?
So this is part of my answer. So the thing I got wrong is I thought that users would be a lot more vocally concerned and, in fact, a lot more silently concerned about privacy. And we were probably the most concerned. And we remain that way. We want to respect people's privacy, give them the control. We don't want their data going places that they don't want to see it turn up. That being said, maybe because we were so conscious of privacy and we erred in that direction, the uniform user feedback, like vast majority of user feedback has been, hey, we want more places for our data to go. It's actually been the opposite. It's been sort of, hey, would you open this up more so that I can set it in more places, so that I can attach it to more things, I can mash it up with more data sources. Maybe that's a virtue of sort of the type of users that we have on our system, but the feedback has almost universally been, I want more places for this data to go rather than I'm worried about the places it may go in the future.
We're having a very similar experience. I mean, we too protect our users' data and let them control it, but they do ask us if they, can integrate it with other platforms that they're on. One thing where I see the world going, and I know this is controversial, but if people perceive value, they're willing to give up their data, right? I mean, you think about Facebook and Google and how much data we give up there about ourselves, and why? Because of the perceived value that we get in return. And so where I could see the world going is, you qualify for healthcare or health insurance discounts because you give up your data, because you're willing to prove that you are engaging in these healthy behaviors. And by proving that you're engaging in these healthy behaviors, you get, you save some money, and that's perceived value. So I think the way that people interact with their data is changing, and I think especially with younger generations that are more used to giving up their data, I think it's going to become less and less of a concern, and that's a good and bad thing.
So I mean, as an investor in the space, that's the part of the market that I'm really passionate about. I think that's a massive opportunity. So tell me how you guys plan to move from the chronically fit, the sexy part of the market, to the chronically not fit, right? And the infirm. How do you bleed into healthcare?
David, you look great.
Thank you.
To be honest, a lot of our users are not elite athletes. They're just regular people with their own regular goals. They wouldn't consider themselves performance-type health enthusiasts or fitness enthusiasts. Their BMI certainly wouldn't indicate that that's the case. That's why when people ask me sort of, when's the tipping point of when these devices become mainstream? We're already there. I mean, we can tell you that from our user base. We're certainly already there. And maybe that's because part of our system is about meeting you where you are and improving you from there rather than expecting you to go to 5K in a week or to a half marathon in a month. We really meet you where you are and step you up incrementally from there. And so we're seeing people come in with modest goals or with modest starting points and have achievements that they're really proud of. And I think that's even more important.
But you are capturing, this is not just steps, calories, and distance. You're going a couple steps beyond and have the technology, I would imagine, to go beyond that or looking for that technology. Does the company plan to move into kind of payer-supported the healthcare system with some products?
Wow, I think that requires some catch-up from the payers, which I'm enthusiastic. We're starting to hear a lot of that noise right now. It's actually starting, but I think they might be in the tortoise group.
We're starting to see some traction in that regard as well, inbound inquiries from folks in the healthcare channel, and the application of our technology is relevant there in terms of, there's two things that matter in healthcare today. It's one, lowering costs, and two, it's improving clinical outcomes. And so the use of our technology for lowering costs is, for example, hospitals get penalized if there is a readmission of a patient within 30 days. So you could imagine the use of our technology to monitor a patient once they've been released from the hospital, and using predictive analysis based on their movement patterns to know whether or not they're at risk for going back into the hospital. And if they are at risk, then there's some sort of intervention made. So that's one example of the use of our technology in the healthcare system. Another one is to be able to objectively quantify clinical outcomes pre and post treatment. So, for example, you could imagine using our sensor-based technology and understanding people's movement patterns before surgery, and then looking at their movement patterns after surgery, and being able to objectively quantify, okay, did this person truly improve? Did they truly get healthier? Right now, it's a very subjective manner in which the patient is asked, after the surgery, they're given a survey, did they improve? Or the physician will eyeball the patient's movement, in a clinical setting, not in their natural setting. So we get really excited thinking about the applications of our technology in the medical channel.
Robert, I know you're waiting to weigh in on this. Talk about the FDA.
Actually, I'll tag on one earlier question. You talked about need devices all be sort of uniformly accurate. Do you need a sort of a universal metric? And I think there's room for devices that are less accurate, and also room for devices that are more accurate, as long as people know the difference. I was thinking maybe a shout out to the Shine device. Very simple in concept, measuring general level of activity, not directly translated into calories or things like that, but useful. The little dots being activated and behavior changing, and useful even though it doesn't translate into a universal metric of sort of caloric output. Whereas for medical purposes, diagnostic for physicians, you certainly want greater accuracy. And just in terms of sort of the impact of all of these devices on people who are not healthy, exactly what the distribution is that impacts health is unknown, but it's probably multivariate. What's the impact of the physician hospital system? Maybe 20%. There's some other additional percent which is behavior, and then some other additional percent which is genetic. And interesting with the whole healthcare reform, accountable care organizations being held accountable for the overall cost of an enrollee, so in the plan, when they maybe only have direct influence over 10 or 20%. And this is a source of frustration for physicians, although they mount the challenge. But if you can have devices that can help encourage good behavior outside the acute setting, whether it be your posture, activity level, what you're eating, these things would all be for the good. It'll be interesting to which extent are they voluntary, to which extent are they involuntary, the whole privacy issue. But I think we'll see healthcare organizations begin to view their purview as much broadly. Just in Great Britain, there are organizations which are given a pot of money to take care of the health of an entire population. And then they can divvy it up, nutrition, home health, however they wish. And in that kind of a context, all these wearable devices can be very useful for improving health overall.
Thank you. We've got about 5 more minutes. I'm going to ask one last question, then we'll open it up to questions. If you weren't working on the problem that you're currently working on, which behavior would you like to change? What's the most lucrative, and where should I be investing?
You mean if I didn't have to work, what would I be doing? Probably lap times at Laguna Seca.
If you weren't focusing on problems you're addressing through BASIS,
Yeah.
what problems would you want to solve? In other words, where should I be spending money?
Would you be doing tequila testing, or?
I'm not against it. 'Tis the season, after all. Look, I think there's a lot of different areas in this sort of health issue that I think I'm still passionate about and don't have good solutions. I think we hinted at one earlier, which is nutrition. I think there's really interesting ways to track nutrition right now, but it's sort of a little bit relegated to the people who are very needs-based or passionate about doing that, maybe a little sort of QS-oriented in terms of tracking the things that you eat all day, I think that's a huge opportunity. Having something that's more automated in that road would be a huge benefit to all of us, even if it's not calories in. Maybe it's a constituent, maybe it's the benefits of what you're eating, maybe it's even just one vector about what you're eating, whether it's good and bad.
Will a notebook be okay, just with a pencil, or will it track what you're writing?
Anything automatic would be fine, so that's a no. But anything that picks something about your nutrition and can track that automatically without your conscious input, I think would be a huge win. So I'd have a go at that.
Building on that, I think the holy grail would be being able to track caloric intake. And I know that's related to your research, but it's, there's the company Proteus, the ingestible pill. If they expand their technology to know exactly what you ate and how caloric it was, and I feel like that's the missing piece of much of the fitness equation. But in terms of our technology, opportunities I would love to work on, but we just don't even have the bandwidth, is the application of it to the aging population. And how can sort of movement tracking, biomechanical tracking be used for the aging population so that they can age in place?
Great. Questions? I'll try to repeat them.
Can you talk about what I may have missed it? I'm trying to get my questions there, but can you?
Good luck.
Can you talk a little bit about, we know that if people take a picture of every one of their dinners or breakfast or lunch, that they actually lose weight. If you take a picture of everything you eat. I was interested, and maybe I missed it, but how are you guys integrating with what's happening socially in sort of your own sort of meta SDKs? Is there a way, because I can see with your back thing, or I can see with your things that you can integrate with Instagram quite easily about at least giving people a trend saying, now you're wearing this, why don't you take a picture every day of your food and see if it adjusts with what you're doing? So I just wanted to understand how it may not have the bandwidth, but how you integrate with that.
David, word for word, what was the question?
How you integrate what you're watching the camera into your...
So I can extend part of your question there in that we notice that when people wear our device, even before they add a habit about a particular part of their lifestyle, they'll start improving that part just because they know that it's a focus for them. They've invested in that. They see metrics right on their wrist. They can see their heart rate and their steps and calories and their walks and runs and bike rides. And so we actually...
Can I stop you there just 1 second?
Yeah.
Because the bigger question is that around this idea of metrics, how do we know you guys aren't snake oil salesmen, essentially, right? Because I have the Nike band, I've got the Google Glass, I've got everything. And my biggest problem is, you can see it online with the Nike Fuel bands, is that people don't really know what Nike Fuel is, right? And they can't figure out the algorithms. And we still don't know the caloric intake of something. So for me, personally, I just use it as a trend. But that's, I guess, to let you sort of interrupt, but that's to continue, is that how accurate is what you're currently doing? Because that's the important thing. Because after a while,
Great question.
You get to the point where you're saying, is it really...
Sure, great question. So I'll give you the example in our platform, and these guys can give you theirs. I can show you the basis system after the panel and give you an actual visual of how this works. But when you add a habit, it actually tells you the days on which you achieve it. And as you achieve it week to week, the goals go up, and it tells you how many weeks you've achieved it in a row. So it's not sort of, hey, your score is 100 today and good luck for tomorrow. It's a goal that's personalized for you. It's personalized for this week. You see how many times you achieve it. You see it adjust. Then you see how you go against the new goal. And over time, you can actually track back and see how much you've improved in each of those habits. And those habits take up your whole lifestyle. And it's health and activity and running and cycling and all these different things. So there's actually a very clear, visualized trajectory of your success over time. It's one of the key learnings for us. If we show people their resting heart rate every day, or their heart rate in the moment every day, or their perspiration or their skin temperature, that's really important for some people. But for everyone, those wins that actually make you feel better and healthier are the ones that really count. So that trajectory, you can look back and see, oh, I really was only getting a good night of sleep 1 day a week, and even then it was only at the bare minimum of good. Now I'm doing it 3 or 4 nights a week, or maybe more. It's really at the optimum side of that. My resting heart rate looks good, my duration, my quality, the number of interruptions. You have a lot of different metrics to track your success, but I'd be happy to show you afterwards.
Could I comment? It's very difficult to figure out what the control should be in a clinical trial for a medical device in general, and particularly when you're dealing with, for example, obesity or depression, because the control group generally gets better. You can call it the Hawthorne effect, like, for example, with pharma, you can have the active experimental group gets the pill, and the control group gets a sugar pill. What do you do with a hip implant? What's a sham hip implant? What's a sham heart valve? And some of my business partners are trying to get devices implantable devices to treat obesity, and the control group always loses weight. And also, if you do look at the literature for body media, that was sort of even the control group lost weight. And it makes it tough to scientifically prove that the device is causing the improvement.
Can you guys speak to the legal things that we've got to get through for this to go beyond just calories and things like that, and to get this actually into hospitals and there's a lot of...
How do you penetrate the healthcare system is the question.
Yeah, have you guys already looked into that? I know there's a lot, but how do we get this into where it can really help your people?
Yeah, I mean, we're buzzing red, so this might be a longer question. I'm happy to connect with you offline about that. It's going to be a partnership between us and the healthcare profession at large. The FDA will be a part of that. HIPAA will be a part of that, but let's catch up for lunch.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Awesome.